I'm Danielle Johnson, Manager Digital Experience.
And I'm Kathryn Martin, Manager of Discovery Technologies at Deakin University Library. Today we'll give you an insight into Deakin Library's open source discovery layer prototype project, including the initial drivers, project process, lessons learned and outcomes. It's no secret that libraries have a complex relationship with the discovery layer and that the response to the next generation search interfaces has been decidedly mixed. The original vision for discovery layer centred on the idea that elements of the Google user search experience would be replicated by aggregating content under a single interface. However, discovery layers have not entirely managed to achieve the same user experiences as web search engines. Much of this is related to the content they are required to surface and the complexity around the second stage of the search and access paradigm. Google does not have the same imperative as libraries to ensure users are able to retrieve content, whereas a key value underpinning library discovery is to expose licensed content and ensure users can access it. Licensing, authentication, and authorization mechanisms all add a level of complexity that Google does not necessarily have to address. Based on our experience and user research, however, these concerns do not appear to be shared by our clients. At Deakin, the library search interface experiences a high level of use and consistent growth in the retrieval of full-text content, achieving the aim of connecting users with that content. With these considerations in mind, we saw an opportunity to build an open source discovery layer prototype as a research and development project. Working with an open source platform presents opportunities to learn more about how discovery layers function and surface content, possible levels of customisation, and how full text searching compares with those that privilege curated metadata. It also provides a unique opportunity to look at user search behaviour, the quality of search experiences, and a potential point of comparison for new releases of interfaces and commercial provider platforms. Building a prototype was our way of testing our assumptions and learning, as well as understanding some of the challenges related to aggregating content from various sources, interface design, and integration with other sources and systems. This was an in-house research and development project with a mandate for work to be undertaken in addition to other project and operational workloads. Project timelines were therefore extremely flexible, with an original projection of 6 months extended to more than 18 months to this point. In the very beginning, we decided that the best approach to manage the work required was to use a streamed approach, creating a technical and an experience stream. The project was undertaken by the teams making up the Digital Library and Repositories Directorate, who are responsible for the library systems and the digital and discovery experience. A library project team of 12 was established with cross-functional expertise. The initial phase included a good deal of brainstorming and pulling together of ideas to identify where to start. It seemed a huge undertaking and quite daunting when we saw how much we had to consider to even start the planning process. Initial brainstorming included questions about the selected platform, for example, how much work would be required for setup and ongoing maintenance. How would the integrations compare to our current search platform? Would there be more or less flexibility? What would our metadata sources be? Connectors and user flows, what would they all be? Early questions centred around interface customisation, look and feel, information architecture, the potential for personalisation, integration with our existing work with personas, and the relevancy of results. To focus on the R&D aspect, we chose not to directly engage with stakeholders. However, those voices and experiences were considered in other forms and, as part of our consideration of the next steps, will be critical to any future development of the prototype. Environmental scanning was critical in identifying the two most used open source discovery platforms in academic libraries for us to assess, Viewfind and Blacklight. First impressions of Blacklight were that it seemed a more customisable and flexible user experience and interface. In contrast, most Viewfind installs were all remarkably similar, which was a concern for the experience stream, who worried it may therefore be difficult to shape Viewfind to meet our own needs. To further assess Viewfind suitability, an instance was installed on a virtual Windows 10 machine. This enabled us to look at the basic technical architecture and capabilities of the application to integrate with a range of APIs. Initially, we ran into some issues querying the ILMS via API, so decided to experiment with the MARC record load of our holdings into the viewfind environment. This was not a long-term solution, but enabled us to understand how the system retrieved and displayed records. Eventually, the API worked with only some minor configuration. As our confidence grew, we engaged the university's information technology expertise to establish an enterprise-compliant Red Hat Linux-based hosting environment. The eventual transitioning of the project to the hosted environment allowed us to streamline and coordinate these distributed pieces of development work and supplied a more stable and secure platform on which to base the project. There were some initial challenges with the number of records we needed to upload. Once this was resolved, the records were exported in MARC format, ensuring each had a unique identifier to differentiate between similar records and titles. This process also provided an opportunity to review our metadata and look at potential improvements to facilitate better access within both viewfind and our current library search. Next, we made decisions on the best metadata sources for each search type. Using viewfind meant there was potential to utilise bespoke and combined data sources, for example, A to Z databases, the catalogue and Talis Aspire. However, right now our viewfind instance utilises only EDS as a data source. To ingest more than one data source requires a solution on how to combine sources in a logical, seamless, user-friendly way. For now, we'll leave it as is, but several possibilities are currently under consideration for future development. With user experience front of mind, we'll continue to consider the most manageable, user-centred design solution. Now I'll hand over to Danny to talk more about the user experience data and design principles that guided this build to its current state.
Thanks, Kathy. All right. So to drive our understanding and decision-making around interface design requirements, we unpacked users' information-seeking behaviour, pain points and needs. We used existing bodies of knowledge to do this, including our library online chat logs, user interview results from an earlier search experience project, data from Google Analytics and Google Data Studio, longitudinal happiness tracking survey data that we'd collected through our vendor discovery platform, EBSCO Discovery Service, our library proto-personas, observations from previous library ideation sessions and results from library client surveys. Unpacking user behaviours, needs and pain points was a messy process. We read and we analysed the various sources and we made hundreds of sticky note observations using an online collaborative tool called Miro. You can see that there. Once the data had been dissected enough so that we weren't really getting any new insights, we organised our observations into themes. These themes then the themes that were generated then formed the basis for developing some user stories and personas. Distilling our oh crap, sorry about that guys. All right, I'm just going to jump ahead. Just one moment. All right. So distilling our user research data down to a suite of user stories and personas was necessary to articulate the core needs of our broad user base, to enable visual and interaction design conversations, and to share a vision both within and outside of the project team around what it was we wanted to deliver. After much discussion, a lengthy list of stories was narrowed down to 13 that most resonated within our context. In addition to these user stories, 3 personas were generated: the first timer, the make-doer, and the seasoned researcher. Each persona included an about me statement written in the first person to personalise and reflect on their experience, a list of needs, goals and pain points, and a selection of quotes from real users that reflected that archetype. Collectively, the user stories and the personas helped us to keep a user-centred focus, and in turn were used to define a set of user-centred principles to drive the design and development of our prototype. So defining the principles would lay the foundations of the prototype, and it also defined measures for achieving success. We landed on these 8 principles to underpin the direction of the prototype's design and development. Each principle contained not only this, but a simple statement that explained it in more detail, measures to enable practical application of that principle, and those user stories mapped back to each relevant principle. Once we had our user stories, personas and principles, we moved into the design phase. The project used the skill set of 2 in-house library designers to articulate the visual and interaction design of our prototype interface. Now, these designers weren't involved in the project until after the technology was selected and implemented and the user experience research was completed and articulated, and also some baseline functionality determined. This meant that they came into the project with fresh eyes. Visualising the interface was a real turning point in the project. Until then, our focus had been deliberately on implementing the technical infrastructure and data integrations and in understanding the search experience. So as a result, nobody in the project had really tried to envisage a new or different interface. Our designers articulating the principles and the user stories into an interface design was a lightning bolt moment for us all. And you can see their first iteration of that design here. Once the interface was visualised, we were able to work through in detail the features and the functionality that were missing. Multiple iterations of the design were required to ensure we'd captured the level of detail we wanted, particularly in relation to metadata display, favouriting and sharing user flows, and filtering requirements. This highly iterative process also involved continued engagement with our technical project team members so that they could identify and address any technical limitations that would impact on our proposed visual and interaction design. To further facilitate both the design and build phases, we concurrently documented and prioritised functionality. And it was easiest for us to consider the discovery layer in 3 parts and divide the functionality up according to these groups. So we had search initiation, so those elements such as the search box and filters, summary results display, so those core features and functions for those most important tasks or the most important information about a record, and the full record where you could access more detailed item record data. It became clear that electronic resources functionality could be separated out from that of the physical resources functionality, and we made a decision to prioritise development and testing on the e-resources flow. So any of the functionality that primarily supported access to physical resources, such as campus location functions, requests, item holds, became low priority for development. Creating user flow diagrams was helpful in articulating the experience and therefore the functionality of what we wanted to deliver. We went through various iterations of user flows, but we ultimately landed on this one. The e-resource flow that you see here enables the user to connect to the electronic resource whilst allowing them to flow between filtering, new searches and full record display, as well as sharing results and saving to a favourites list. All right, so it's demo time. Just fingers and toes crossed, and we'll have a look at the current state prototype. So this will just take you through the search initiation, so initiating a search, selecting some filters, and really it's just demonstrating some of the features that are in the display. I feel like I need some background music, but that's way beyond my capability with PowerPoint. So now it moves into the summary results display. And just showing the share functionality. The social media feature doesn't work yet. It's there, it looks great, but it doesn't actually function. But the other sharing options do. And then moving into the full item record display. And finally, the favourites. So obviously that's a fairly simple video, and you can move in and around the prototype in a variety of different ways. It's just trying to show you some of the options that are available to you, and it hopefully should end up with the most important thing, which is accessing the record itself, the item itself. Okay. So our prototype delivers these 3 key points of differentiation with traditional vendor discovery layers. Firstly, it embraces a consumer website paradigm over that traditional library search paradigm. Our designers deliberately looked outside the library search experience to consumer search experiences for inspiration. An example of this consumer paradigm in our prototype is the use of pre-filtering functionality. So based on an existing filtering model that's commonly used in the corporate sector, such as realestate.com.au and domain.com.au, as you see here, the designers interpreted our principles around intuitive design to incorporate pre-filtering, forcing users to view and then select, if appropriate, filters before their search results are displayed. That's very much in contrast, I guess, to the standard model that we often see in discovery layers, library discovery layers, where filters are offered post that simple or basic search, even though we all know that filtering is almost consistently required to get any meaningful library search results. Deviating from traditional library-centric labelling and terminology was another point of difference. So using universal naming conventions such as add to bag, favourites and share, instead of traditional library terminology like add to folder, my lists, cite, export, was a deliberate choice to align to our principle around clear, plain and minimalistic language. Using contextualised call to action buttons for each record, read now, watch now, listen now, written in plain language was also an example of this in action. So you can just see a couple of screenshots here. The top two are from our prototype and the bottom one's from our current vendor discovery layer.
Known item discovery, a source of discontent for library staff in our existing vendor discovery layer, appears markedly better in Viewfind based on testing to date. This appears to be due to Viewfind's use of weighting and fuzziness to determine relevancy. Weighting is a well-known relevancy tool where the importance of a record element is adjusted or ranked, and fuzziness employs the theory that you do not necessarily need matches on all terms provided in the user's search string. Another related point of differentiation is the previously mentioned plan to pull information for filters from multiple sources, such as pre-existing scopes in our catalogue, which will definitely improve findability, particularly for niche collections.
All right. So we met several challenges throughout this project, but honestly, that's the point of doing this kind of project, and they've all served as lesson learning opportunities. In practice, our defined principles were aspirational, I guess, rather than actual. For example, limitations due to the nature of the proof of concept approach, such as not being able to integrate Viewfind with our institutional single sign-on, impacted our ability to deliver seamless and continuous experiences across systems, as we kind of had defined in our third and fourth principles. We also recognise that not testing with real users throughout the prototype's development means that delivering on the principles around universal design, intuitive search process and user-driven interfaces is somewhat limited in terms of practical user validation. The availability and capacity of project team staff often created blocks to progress. So whilst this was an accepted project risk, it was far more impactful than we originally expected. And this was probably because we underestimated the amount of effort and complexity that was required to build a prototype discovery layer. Who would have thought, to our kind of perfectionist standards, and also other work outside of our control that particularly consumed our technical staff resourcing at really pivotal moments in this project. So that was a decision we had to make. The amount of resource we were willing to, and able to throw at the prototype is also a key factor in deciding to scale back the proof of concept and deprioritise that physical resources flow. Dependence on vendor APIs for metadata is a major constraint. These APIs are not always fully developed to pass all the necessary metadata fields, but they do play a determining role in how results are retrieved and displayed. The largest and most impactful build challenge was the difficulty in making the server hosting Viewfind accessible to everyone on the project. We were heavily dependent on our University Information Technology department to make this possible, and significant delays in that meant that developers spent much of the project working on separate local environments. This meant that changes were not always visible to the entire project team, and it was a really inefficient way of working. And finally, the difference between being proof of concept ready and production ready was something we really had to recognise and accept. Striving for production perfection just wasn't going to be possible for us, so reining in our expectations and accepting those practical limitations around technology infrastructure, testing, testing and design and interaction refinements was necessary. If you've ever worked with designers, you know that they're perfectionists, so it can be hard to manage that expectation. there have been many benefits. I think all of those challenges are actually benefits wrapped up in challenges as well. There's been many benefits in undertaking this R&D project as well. We found that even though they might have been aspirational, those principles, the personas, the user stories actually stand up outside of this project, and they can be adopted for other library projects, activities and knowledge sharing. So the development of that user research base with broader application is a real advantage of the approach that we took for creating the prototype. We've also substantially built up our technical expertise right across our directorate, and we all now have a better understanding of how that discovery black box works. Working collaboratively across our directorate on a project like this was so important, especially given the context of COVID and working from home when this all kind of came to pass. It allowed us to continue to build upon our relationships at a time when it could have been very easy for us to become more insular and more sort of separate team focused. This was also one of the first opportunities that our designers had ever had to really explore library search UI, and they learned a lot from that experience. Also, as we learned and questioned, we were able to implement some changes to our existing discovery layer to deliver some immediate real improvement. And finally, this project allowed us to strip back and reassess the true value of discovery features, which is a really valuable exercise. We were able to reflect on that notion that just because a discovery layer can deliver a piece of search or access functionality doesn't necessarily mean that it should. So, what next? Well, whilst we don't have any intention of taking our prototype into a production environment and replacing any of our existing discovery layers, don't panic vendors out there, we'll certainly take the learnings stemming from it into our future ways of working. In fact, we already are, into our ways of working with search and discovery. Sometimes it can seem like a luxury to undertake an exploratory project like this, but we've found that making space for such work genuinely reaps benefits in unexpected ways. And if it's managed properly, it can definitely be worth the investment of people's time. We hope to work on more R&D and experimental projects like this into the future. That's it.
Well, thanks so much, Danielle and Kathy, for an amazing, wonderful exploration into your experiences through this development cycle. So that's really great. So we do have a few questions, if I may. Yes. So first of all, might just start off with a compliment, which is really nice. So thank you. So 4 points for an honest presentation, which included the issues still to be resolved. Thank you. That was nice. And we have another question here as well. Did you implement a mobile-first approach?
I can answer that. Yes and no. So when we went through our design phase, our designers designed the mobile and the desktop concurrently. So a responsive approach, I'd say, rather than a mobile-first approach, but certainly keeping in mind that mobile perspective and the fact that they also drew their inspiration from particularly mobile applications that we see. If you've ever used real estate, the realestate.com app, it's fantastic, and that was a really key UI kind of trigger for them because it met so many of our criteria, our user stories.
Got another interesting question here as well. Did you consider using any pre-filtering based on persona from pre-existing user and patron information?
Yeah. Oh, that's an interesting one. Yeah, this is a really interesting area, the area of personalisation. It's something that's come up in our ideation sessions we've done in the past with university and library staff and also with students. We haven't done it in the prototype, but it's an area we're interested in exploring. And there's actually been some questions raised only in the last couple of weeks, actually, within our team around whether it's worthwhile exploring, whether it's truly valuable to do personalisation in a search environment and kind of taking that out to students for more discussion and debate. So not in the prototype, but definitely an area that our library and our university is also quite interested in.
And on a similar vein as well, did the Deakin chatbot provide any data for you to understand the discovery challenges of users?
So I'm not sure. we've got, I'm not sure if you're talking about we have a chat bot and we have our chat logs. So the chat bot, we didn't so much look at the data from that, Deakin Genie. If any of you have seen that, it's actually been decommissioned now. So whilst the data's there, we don't use it anymore. But we did look at the chat log, so the human-to-human chat that happens, facilitated by technology, and that definitely we used a lot of that to inform the pain points in particular and the challenges that people were having with the search experience.
I think we've got time for almost one more. One for Kathy as well. So we've got a question here. It says, from what this person can see, it looks great. And why is it worth trouble versus? Well, was it worth the trouble versus the commercial discovery system? So, like with this system, like going through all this process, you kind of answered it in your conclusion. But what are your own personal feelings about like the discovery layers versus going through a process like this?
That's a tough one. So what are I think that the benefits are definitely that we looked into the way things worked with our current discovery layer and how we could do things better and differently. And that, I think that was probably one of the most important learnings for us. How can we look at things and do it a little bit differently to what the current discovery layers have? And as Danny said before about the personas and things, we used a lot of data from our previous UX research so that we could find the points where people for our current user interface were saying this isn't working as we want it to, and so we had a look at how we could try and improve that sort of thing. But of course we did only go to the do the electronic resources flow. We didn't actually do the print flow, and that's can be one of the areas that has more issues than the electronic resources. I don't know if you want to add to that, Dan.
I was only going to say that one of the things that I think sort of probably, I don't know whether it came through or not, was that I think in terms of being worth the trouble, I think what it's done for us is it's kind of developed our UX maturity and our kind of technology maturity, our understanding of the space. So even though it's not an output where we're going to change the discovery layer as such, all of that learning is built into our staff now. They know things that they understand things that they didn't understand before. And because we worked across teams, that knowledge sharing was really substantial, especially with our technical staff.
Fantastic. I think that's about all we've got time for in the questions for today. So I'd just like to say thank you so much for your wonderful presentation, and let's give them a hand.